now I want to go and clarify what an invasive plant is, because again, this phrase is being thrown around more and more often, which in a sense is good. People are becoming more familiar with it, but there are some parameters we have to set. So by definition, according to the Department of Ag, it is an invasive plant is something that is both non-native and it can establish on many sites, it grows quickly, and it spreads to the point of disrupting plant communities or ecosystems. If we want to get more specific, it is non-native, and its introduction causes economic or environmental harm or harm to human health. So I think a lot of folks understand the environmental harm. The picture below here is just a disturbed forest margin. So this land is cleared for development, farmland, something we see common, and then that is the edge of that clearing. And those disturbed areas, those marginal spaces are where we see invasive plants thrive. And this is wisteria. This is an Asian species of wisteria, and it is absolutely taking over that ecosystem there. And so that is taking over. It is outcrowding, outcompeting native plants. It is smothering, choking trees. It is collapsing foliage, and it is limiting resources from otherwise valuable native plants wildlife needs. So I think a lot of us at least understand the concept of environmental harm, but economic harm is something I also like to remind folks of, and especially when we're dealing with, if we're trying to advocate for removal of invasive plants, or we're trying to sway people, sometimes the dollar signs are really what matter. And if we think about economic harm, examples would be for the Virginia Beach region, if anyone's familiar with Back Bay Wildlife Refuge, over 75%, the number's probably higher now actually, but over 75% of their shorelines have been altered by Phragmites. And they spend a good amount of money trying to combat that. Curbing the invasive plants, removing the invasive plants, spraying, burning, it is all very, very costly. These invasive plants disrupt agriculture. These invasive plants can disrupt their farming activities, graze, forage for species. These invasive plants cause issues in power line right-of-ways, all of these different facets that cost money to address. And then lastly, the human harm, or those are a little less common, but a really good example would be hogweed, giant hogweed. It's this really tall, fast-growing plant with bristles and spines that could cause severe irritation should it touch your skin, and it can also cause blindness. And that is an invasive plant. We see it more so Pennsylvania spreading south, and I believe it's now been documented in some counties in Northern Virginia. But that is an example of an invasive plant that also causes harm to human health. So again, there are parameters that we need to talk about when we talk about invasive plants. One thing quickly too, a lot of folks now are saying that certain plants are invasive when they are not. There are plants that have naturalized. Queen Anne's lace, that is something that is not native. It is naturalized and spread pretty quickly, but it's not outcompeting or causing any of those issues of harm. Another example of misuse of the term invasive, cattails, or I'm trying to think, Virginia creeper. Those are native plants. They are just aggressive. They are not invasive. So there is a distinction there. This is a picture of some Phragmites. That Phragmites is incredibly detrimental all across any areas that have moisture in North America, essentially, at this point. These invasive plants are going to displace and outcompete our native species. That's going to disrupt food webs. That threatens our biodiversity. And over half of our native species, plants and animals, they are endangered and threatened due to invasive populations. This could be invasive plants, but this could also be the introduction of invasive wildlife as well. These invasive plants are then taking the place of a species that would benefit our wildlife. That Phragmites is taking the space of something that could potentially flower and provide a nectar source, or that would provide seed that is a balanced nutritional resource for our birds. So they're taking the place of something beneficial. They can reduce our land productivity. So again, if we think back towards agriculture, they can be vectors for disease. So invasive plants, when they're introduced to an area, they can cause and introduce disease. One of the first examples I think of is our native red mulberry. It is being outcompeted by the invasive white mulberry. That white mulberry carries a plant pathogen and it is adapted to it and it can exist in the presence of that pathogen. But when we brought that white mulberry over, that pathogen jumped to our red mulberries and it has been really hard hit by it. And so that invasive red mulberry spreads really quickly. And as it spreads, it is spreading that disease as well. The whole reason that white mulberry was actually introduced, when we talk about invasive plants, when I talk about why they're popular, for the most part, I would like to give people the benefit of the doubt, and they didn't just think, ooh, let me cause vast economic distress and ecological distress by introducing this plant. There's usually a reason that plant came over. It could be a collector plant. It could be something someone deemed valuable to ornamental horticulture. Others could be economic benefits they thought they would see. So the white mulberry was actually brought over to try and establish a North American silk trade. So the white mulberry hosts the caterpillars, the silk moths that they harvest silk from. So they thought by introducing that white mulberry, we could produce our own silk. And needless to say, it did not pan out for us, and the white mulberry stuck around long after. Invasive plants will physically alter the environment in some cases. Allelopathy, that term there, that is where a plant excretes chemicals of some kind into the soil, and those chemicals would then inhibit germination and growth of surrounding plants. These invasive plants, they can increase the intensity of our wildfires. We're seeing that across the United States. They can deplete water sources and availability for other plants and wildlife, or they can even cause erosion in some instances. So they can physically alter the environment. And then again, just stressing that they cost us a lot of money to manage. So these invasive plants, they can hurt our industries, like I said, agriculture, but also fisheries. Our public utilities are threatened by them in some instances, and they also impact industries like tourism, recreation. The main price point, though, is going to come from the active removal of these plants. So again, I just like to lay the groundwork, establish why we want to remove these invasive plants and why we should put natives in their place. I do like to let folks know that there is a science to it. It's not just people that are like, I don't like that plant, I'm calling it invasive. There are qualifiers. There's a method to the madness. And so there is a thing called I ranks, invasiveness ranks. They reflect the level of threat to ecosystems in the surrounding area. So they're broken into high, medium, and low threats. And these invasiveness I ranks increase for species that potentially alter natural processes. Again, alter the physical environment, how quickly and intensely they could invade undisturbed natural areas, how we could see them spread in a forested setting. They can cause substantial impacts in rare, vulnerable native species or natural areas. So an invasive plant that is now starting to be seen in an area that is a known habitat for a threatened or vulnerable species, that would jump the I rank up of that invasive plant. Their distribution affects it, how rapidly they disperse and spread, and then the resources that go into controlling it. So again, I just like to share this with folks because sometimes you might see a plant on this list that personally you really loved, or you didn't know it was invasive, or it's behaved in your yard. There is a method to the madness when it's with this, and again, that's why I like to share this with folks. There's a science behind it. It's not just arbitrarily decided. I like to have a slide on early detection. Early detection is really important when I speak to groups that are interested in gardening, when I speak to master gardeners, when I do this presentation for other organizations. The more educated the audience becomes, the better early detection protocol we have, the more likely we're going to stop or at least slow the spread of some invasive plants. So these early detection species, they're not yet widely established, in our case in Virginia, but they are invasive in similar habitats or nearby habitats, essentially. So these are things that, we have noticed in the botanical garden, for example, liriope. That is a common ornamental grass-like herbaceous plant that a lot of folks planted out. We've seen it start to be really resistant to pesticides, and it is spread pretty rapidly in our forested areas where it's not been planted. So that is something that we are keeping an eye on. That could be a potential early detection species that makes it to the list. So that's just something if you we encourage folks as they become more familiar with gardening and landscaping, things like that. If they see something that is suspicious, always keep an eye on it. There are people that are tracking that information. Because of this monitoring of early detection species, we have an updated invasive plant species list. So this is their DCR, the Department of Conservation and Recreation at the state. This is an invasive plant species list that is freely available. You can have a PDF of it. I know it's kind of hard to read on the screen, but I just wanted you guys to get an idea of what this looks like. Plants are broken up into high, medium, and low ranking levels of invasiveness. And it gives you an idea of one, it gives you their scientific and their common name, but it gives you an idea of, again, what it means to be invasive and the early detection species. So there's quite a lot of things on here. There's certain plants that were increased. A lot of plants moved to the high category. Some controversial plants have been added. Buddleia Davidii, the butterfly bush, has now been added to the invasive plant list. It's an early detection species. So this is just something to be aware of. It's a free resource, but I like to show folks what this looks like just for their, so that they know what is invasive in our state. I would like to acknowledge that we finally have the invasive plant labeling bill signed into law. Last year, the bill failed, got vetoed right at the last moment. We were asking for invasive plants to not be sold in nurseries. And I actually went to an event, I spoke to our governor, and he said he was not in the business of telling businesses what they can and can't sell. So the verbiage in the law was edited, and it was then kind of the compromise was, well, if you're going to sell it, you have to let people know what you're selling, and you have to let folks know that it is an invasive species that they're buying. So this is a really big step forward. This would then go into effect in January 2027, where if you go to a nursery and you see a species on this list, that it is going to be labeled, and that is a really, really big step for education for the public, because a lot of folks, again, just don't know. So one thing I wanted to address is like what makes invasive plants popular, because again, I don't want to make anybody feel guilty if you see one of these plants that's in your yard or you have a really nostalgic association with it, great memories. When folks tell me they like a plant that's invasive, there's a reason. It's not because they know it's invasive. Invasive plants have been pushed on us for a very, very long time, especially by retailers. And some of the reasons are, if you don't have familiarity with our natural systems and ecosystems, these plants seem really tough and they seem pretty low maintenance. These plants spread quickly. So if you are someone looking into gardening and you got a lot of ground to cover, or you don't have a lot of money and you want to start getting a few things, if you see a plant that it's like, this is going to spread, it's going to fill your flower bed up in the first couple of years, that's going to be a positive selling point if it's sold to you that way. Same thing, these plants reproduce quickly. You get more bang for your buck. This also means that they are more interesting to retailers. You know, if they can reproduce it quickly, they have more product to sell. They're often sold as pest resistance. There's little damage. That's because they have a lack of natural predators. But again, it's all how you spin it. And so for all of these reasons, they are pushed by retailers and plant breeders, because it means that these plants then result in easier production and lower liability. They're less likely to die. So again, it's all a marketing thing as to why these plants are so prevalent in the landscape and why they are still so commonly sold. I'd like to talk on why cultivar. There are some invasive plants that are sold as cultivars, and are they safe? Cultivars are a cultivated variety. There are naturally occurring plants that have mutations that are of interest to us as people. They could look cool, they could smell different, they could be a different size. Often we see things that have variegation. So variegation is where we have that white or gold pattern. It's the absence of chlorophyll. It is a mutation in the plant, but we think it looks interesting, so we like to clone it and sell it. when we see these plants, like one of the most common ones I see, that miscanthus on the right hand side, zebra grass, that is really common in the landscape because it's impossible to kill. And telling you from personal experience, it's impossible to rip up. But that variegated, that silver variety is sold as a sterile cultivar, meaning this isn't going to produce seed. This isn't going to spread. It might be an invasive species, but this cultivar will not reproduce. And that might be true in the moment, but the variegation is a spontaneous mutation. And guess what? That plant has the potential to spontaneously mutate back and revert back to its original code. So we see those patches of green grass there. That is a reversion. And guess what? As that grows, it's going to be more vigorous than the cultivar. It's, the cultivar again, it's missing chlorophyll. That's why it looks interesting. This has fully functioning green leaves. It's going to grow more rapidly. And guess what? It will produce flowers and therefore seed. Same thing with the Eleagnus on the left-hand side. You see this a lot in the beach, especially in the Outer Banks if you were to go down there. It's very salt tolerant, but that gold variety is commonly sold as an indestructible plant, but it often reverts and mutates back, and you get that original green. And again, that'll produce fruit and seeds. So it might be sterile when you buy it, but it might not always stay that way. So with that, we wrap up kind of my basis of why we're doing this, why we want to replace our native plants, invasive plants with native plants. Now how we go into the rest of this, it is a slideshow for you guys. So I have gone through vines, shrubs, trees, perennials. I've gotten the most common requested, commonly seen, commonly sold invasive plants. We'll talk about why they might be popular, what you might like, the features you might like about it, and then that's when I will show you guys a native alternative. So first up, we're starting with vines, wisteria. I loved wisteria as a kid. I wanted to have an arbor and a house covered with it. As I got older, I saw, my family's porch basically ripped down by some wisteria. And I started to learn how it aggressively chokes trees. It smothers out local ecosystems. It might be really pretty, but again, there are a lot of downsides to this plant, but people like it. It's this whimsical kind of fantasy, beautiful flowers in spring. There's two types of invasive wisteria. They're both species of Asian descent. We have the Japanese wisteria and the Chinese wisteria. Japanese wisteria tends to flower, and you will see that in conjunction with green leaves, whereas the Chinese wisteria tends to flower first, and then it will flesh its leaves out. But again, people like this for its ornamental value, and folks like that it'll cover a trellis, a fence, things like that. Starting off strong, we actually have an almost, I wouldn't say identical, but very strong. We have a wisteria to replace it with. We do have native wisterias, the American wisteria, Wisteria frutescens. I absolutely love this one. It is a host plant for some butterflies. We have it in our butterfly house. It's not as aggressive, which is a good thing. It's not going to rip your arbor down. It's not going to bend your trellis. It's not going to choke any trees. It's much more well-behaved. It doesn't have as long, showy panicles, but it's still a really great choice here. And then there's also the Kentucky wisteria. That one, I personally just haven't had as much luck with it in Hampton Roads. I think it's a humidity issue, but again, really beautiful alternatives to those Asian wisteria species. And again, they're also a host plant for some insects. Japanese honeysuckle. This one, I think everybody might be at least familiar if you haven't done it yourself, where you pinch the bottom and you pull the nectar out with the stamen. And folks love the smell. It smells like summer. You get tons of flowers, but the problem is it is, again, another vine that is going to choke some trees out. It is going to smother, cover the ground, prevent other native plants from emerging, limited resource for wildlife. Interestingly enough, the Japanese honeysuckle, Lanicera japonica, it's in the honeysuckle family, Lanicera. The non-native species, the berries that are produced, they're very readily spread by birds. But now there's research showing that birds such as the cedar waxwings that eat these berries, it's actually changing their feather pigments. If you're familiar with a cedar waxwing, it's a brown bird that has a little patch of yellow on its tail feather. And they found that birds that eat more of these Lanicera berries, that yellow starts to go orange and even red. And the birds are eating these berries because this invasive honeysuckle, it is outcompeting everything else if you're going to have honeysuckle in a disturbed area, chances are that's just going to all be honeysuckle. So the birds in that area are going to feed more heavily on it because that's what's there. Why this matters? What if the birds that are eating the honeysuckle, what if some of those birds have a genetic issue or they're not the strongest of the species, but their tail feathers are more red? They are more likely to be mated with that unique color variation and pass on those insufficiencies to the next generation. So it's just something to be aware of. You know, these invasive plants, yes, they cause environmental harm, but sometimes that environmental harm might not be noticed until a few generations down the line. But again, folks like it because it is floral, it is fragrant, it is evergreen, so there's interest throughout the year. We have a really great alternative called Carolina Jasmine or Carolina Jessamine, Gelsemium sempervirens. This is an evergreen vine. I've used it quite a bit on trellises and arbors. It's, you know, you've got that green all year round. It flowers really heavily, those yellow trumpet flowers, and they're also fragrant too. So again, I think it's another great alternative. We also have a native honeysuckle, coral honeysuckle. Now, this one, it's not going to be fragrant, but this is a magnet for hummingbirds. This coral honeysuckle, the leaves kind of take on a purplish tone, a little reddish tone in the fall and winter. I've seen this in the garden sporadically bloom throughout it blooms throughout the early spring into fall, but it also is starting to last longer into the fall and even bloom in winter months, which is really interesting because now we have more hummingbirds that are overwintering in the area, and that's a food source for them at that point. But again, it's not fragrant, but it's a really great vine for covering structures. And then trumpet creeper for folks that are planting things that they need to cover a lot of ground fast. Oftentimes I see this with folks covering privacy fences, or they have a chain link fence they can't replace in their yard, but they want to cover it up so it looks better. Trumpet creeper is another native vine. It grows pretty quickly, but again, this is a phenomenal one for hummingbirds because those long trumpet red-like flowers. Porcelain berry. This one is not as big of an issue yet in my neck of the woods in Virginia, but you can see why folks like it. That is really hard to find in nature. Those blues and those different shades of blues all in one plant. Porcelain berry is unique in that it's the chemical composition as the berries. As the berries continue to ripen, the colors change. And again, it's really striking. And I will admit, like this, there's no exact replication for that one, but folks like the vining aspect with the color and the visual interest. For folks that really like the flowers and the purples on that, we have a native clematis. I love this one, leather flower with those bell shaped flowers. Again, a really good one for climbing. And then for folks that want the berries, I like to remind folks that we do have native grapes. Scuppernongs and muscadines are more recognizable, those larger grapes that are sweeter. But we also have a number of other grapes that are native. These are great plants to include for the wildlife. When they flower, they're beautiful, covered in pollinator activity. And once they fruit, again, great for the wildlife, birds, mammals, things like that. Again, these are really great for covering a trellis or a fence. I've planted muscadines a number of years ago along the back fences in our children's garden, and they have just gone nuts. It's a lot of fun to take the kids out there to see the grapes. And then for folks that like the porcelain berry, but they like the exotic look of it, I like to remind folks that passiflora is a phenomenal alternative for someone that wants native, but with an exotic look. Passion fruit is something you can get with certain species of these. Some are small, the fruits are smaller than others, but I just love the flower. And this is also a host for the fritillary butterflies. So it's a host plant for some really interesting butterflies as well. Now for where I'm at in southeastern Virginia, that Passiflora lutea is our native passion flower, and a lot of folks think that is a vine. It's smaller, it's really quick growing, and it creeps along the ground a little bit, stays low, and it's got these tiny little flowers that open. I like to encourage folks to leave that one. I think it's interesting, but it has a bee that depends on it. Our native bee species need our help, and a lot of those bees are what we call pollen specialists. So much like a monarch caterpillar has to feed on milkweed, there are bees that feed on specific types of plant and their pollen, and they feed that pollen to their young. So there's actually a bee here in South Eastern Virginia, that relies on that Passiflora lutea, that little passion flower in the bottom. So just a reminder, if you see it in your garden, I would let it go. I think they're cute little flowers as well. English ivy I have to talk about. English ivy is one of the more prevalent ones we see in disturbed areas, but also we see it in a lot of historic areas, in a lot of older neighborhoods. This is planted because it's indestructible. It grows in really dry shade, and it will climb up, cover a house. Some folks like the look of that, and then there's folks that honestly, probably some of you nodding your heads, maybe listening to this, that know that that can also damage the exterior of your house. English ivy is really aggressive here in the States, and it's really hard to get rid of. It's got really strong root system that's hard to pull up, and it's got really thick, waxy leaves. English ivy is pretty interesting in that that little triangulate leaf we see there, that is the juvenile leaf morphology. As that plant covers the ground, it will creep and creep and creep, and it smothers and takes over anything in its path. But once it starts climbing a tree, it can choke that tree out. It can limit nutrients on the tree. Like wisteria as well, and honeysuckle, this can get into the canopy and it goes crazy. And this is a really good time of year to be aware of this. When we have those invasive vines in our trees, they are adding a lot of weight and surface area up in the canopy. And for us, actually, I think we're technically in hurricane season, that acts as a sail. And so when you have these invasive vines in your tree canopy, you are more likely to experience tree damage and falling during storm systems. So English ivy is a culprit for that as well. But once it climbs into that canopy, it actually changes its leaf shape. And then there's the mature leaf form, which is what I have here in the foreground with English ivy. And once it's matured, it produces berries, and birds spread those berries far and wide, and the process continues. So English ivy is a nightmare. I don't have that much time tonight, but if anybody has issues with it, I have lots of experience with management and different styles of management for it, and I'd be happy to share. Just don't have time to get into that tonight. But you can always reach out to me, put it in the chat. But again, folks like it because it covers ground, and it grows quickly, and it tolerates dry shade. I have to plug Virginia Creeper. I absolutely love Virginia Creeper. I know some folks are shuddering at the thought of me promoting it, but it is a native. Virginia Creeper is very quick growing, aggressive in some situations, but if you're looking to cover a vast area, again, like if you're trying to cover a fence or add some interest, this is a great one to do that. It has absolutely stunning fall color. You can see some of the reds there, and it produces berries, and those berries are incredibly nutritionally valuable to our birds. It also is a host plant for some really interesting moth species, and there's actually now more interest in people purchasing and planting out Virginia Creeper. So there's dwarf varieties, there's variegated varieties, and those are slower growing and definitely a little more well-behaved in the garden setting. I also do have to do a shameless plug for poison ivy. I know folks aren't going to go out and plant it, but if you have it in an area that is not going to bother anybody, like if it's climbing a tree, poison ivy won't choke your tree. But again, it has beautiful fall color, and it has the most nutritional berries for our songbird species. So if you have an area, you can let it peacefully do its thing, like Virginia Creeper, please do. And poison ivy is also a host for some really cool sphinx moths and whatnot. If you are still looking for something that has evergreen interest and will cover a space quickly, crossvine is another native vine that'll do just that. Again, it's a little more aggressive, but there are some cultivars out there that are different flower colors, that there's more yellow and patterned leaves and slower growing. So the market is starting to shift, but I love it. And again, it's another magnet for hummingbirds. And for folks that are have English ivy planted out as a ground cover for dry shade, which is one of the hardest situations to garden in, I like Allegheny spurge, Pachysandra procumbens. There's a couple other Pachysandra species that are not native, but this is the native one. It's one of those things you plant out, and the first year it just kind of sits there, but then once it gets established, it'll take off. And it's a great evergreen ground cover for those like areas that are dry and shady, such as like under an oak tree or maybe along a fence line. So again, that's a great evergreen ground cover alternative. Periwinkle, this vine is really popular. Again, it is just indestructible, dry shade, and flowers. So that's, I mean, folks like it. It's easy. And again, the purple flowers is a big selling point. I love to redirect folks. I don't have a vining kind of habit like that, but I do have some ground covers. Woodland fox is one of my favorites for forested settings. Um, it's fragrant. It is a really heavy bloomer, and it's a nice kind of layered ground cover and texture. Um, we have a really good planting of this in the garden. It blooms early spring, and depending on how hot it gets, it can last for a few weeks. So that's a really gorgeous one. And it's a great nectar source for early season butterflies as well. Another great one that I like that actually can tolerate full sun and into full shade. This is actually native to Virginia Beach. This is Orangeron or Lynnhaven carpet along the Lynnhaven River is where this cultivar or this variety was discovered. And this is indestructible. I have transplanted this in the dead of summer with full sun, and it looked really bad for 2 days and it bounced right back. It forms a nice dense carpet. It's evergreen. This is a great example of what I call a green mulch, where it grows so densely that it's going to prevent other weeds really from establishing. And it produces these tall stalks of daisy-like flowers that have a lot of pollinator activity. So I really love this one for drier, tougher settings. Really like that one. And again, it acts as a nice green mulch in the winter months. Lesser celandine. So this is what we call an ephemeral, or the section about ephemerals. Ephemerals are plants that bloom and emerge early spring, usually in forested or underneath the shade of trees before they leaf out. So as sunlight is still reaching the forest floor, these plants have a really quick life cycle. They emerge, they bloom, and then they die back as the shade grows in from the leaves leafing out. Lesser celandine is something that we see. It was a really big issue in the garden and a lot of the historic neighborhoods in Norfolk. It's got really waxy leaves that's resistant to herbicides. You can divide the tubers. You can try and dig it up, but if you split it, they'll still spread from fragments. It's really hard to remove. You have to just dig a really wide area around it, bag it, and trash it. That's my experience. But folks like it because it is dense and it is a nice daisy yellow like bloom, and it's in early spring. And again, it's in shaded areas. So for a shaded ground cover with yellow flowers, I absolutely love chrysogonum. It's called green and golds. These form a nice dense green mulch, like I was just talking about, with these beautiful yellow flowers. They'll bloom from spring to summer. And then also golden ragwort. I know ragwort isn't the best sounding name, but pacra is a beautiful plant. We have this throughout a lot of areas in the garden. It has a really long bloom period and really tall stalks, these yellow flowers. So I really love that one. It's a really tough, durable plant. And it's one of those plants that it will spread, which I like because you can just divide and move it around. Lily turf Siluriapes, I kind of talked about this earlier. This isn't on the invasive species list, but this is kind of one of those things where we're watching it in the garden. This is incredibly common. It lines the sidewalks, the driveways, flower bed edges. People like it. Obviously, it's got really cool, funky purple flowers and that grass-like texture the rest of the year. I love blue-eyed grass, Scythiancriums. There's a few different cultivars and varieties out there. These are good for full sun. They can also grow in the shade. They're going to have a heavier flower set in full sun, but you still get that color in the shade as well. But these are beautiful purple flowers. They don't have the cool structure necessarily like the Lariape, but also gives that grass-like texture. So it's still a really good border plant, or you can plant them in mass. For folks that like the grassy texture, blue wood sedge, I love this kind of punch of bluish color in the garden, especially in shaded areas. It's a little harder to get some color back in those areas, especially when we talk about foliage. But I absolutely love this one, and it's tough as nails. And then sedges. So caryxes are, I feel like, underappreciated. Caryx is the genus here. But again, they're a great way to get that grassy type of texture. You don't mow these, you just let them do their thing. But they can, there's caryxes that do well in super wet, shady spots in full sun, but there's caryxes like these that'll tolerate those drier settings, drier soils in the shade. So for folks that just want a ground cover that is tough, durable, and they like the look of the grass, these are some great alternatives. Moving into aquatic plants, yellow flag iris. This can persist as a tuber away from water for like 7 years, and then it can be reintroduced to water and it'll just go nuts. This is sold in garden centers for ponds, things like that. It is Absolute nightmare. It is so hard to get rid of. We have it throughout Mirror Lake at the garden. I see it in the ditches and the roadsides all over the place. Um, and the problem is it looks exactly like our native iris when it's not in bloom. So if you see this and you need management strategies, let me know. I will be happy to help guide you in that. But again, it's something that is just in our retail setting really commonly because it flowers and it's indestructible. Folks love the iris flower shape. And thankfully, we have several native irises. These are my two favorites for the garden, our blue flag and our Virginia iris. Um, they will flower in the shade. They will flower much more in full sun, but you get a lot of great pollinator activity. And again, you see we've got the two different colors here. Some actually are even pink, which is really nice, but definitely try to include these native alternatives in your aquatic settings if that's what you're looking for. Water hyacinths, these are still, again, really commonly sold. These will clog up waterways across the US, but people like that spark of color in their pond. For the purple coloration in an aquatic setting, I love pickerel weed. That's what's the purple flower there. Absolutely adore that plant. Really tough marginal plant, and it blooms all summer long, and you get all kinds of pollinator activity on it. You get all kinds of butterflies that visit it. Really, really great plant for wildlife and a really great filter for water as well. For folks that want flowering interest, like in the middle of a pond that floats, and not those marginal areas, we do have a native water lily, Nymphaea odorata, that is the fragrant water lily. For any of our water lilies, or if you plant our native lotus or any aquatic water lily or lotus, I recommend putting it in like a terracotta or plastic pot and sinking it because they will fill a residential small pond pretty quickly. But again, it's a great native plant. You get a lot of great pollinator activity, and they're really, really pretty. So if you're looking for a floating flower interest, I would steer you towards that one. Into our grasses, we have zebra grass. Kind of talked on that earlier when we talked about reversions and sterile plants. Miscanthus is just so popular in the landscape because it's indestructible. It is so, so, so hard to remove. But people like it because of that. They like it because it's got interest in the fall. It's going to stay there and it's going to hold that soil together. I would steer them towards switchgrasses, panicums. We have so many panicums on the market. There are so many colors and sizes. You can get short ones. You can get upright columnar ones. You can get fountain-like ones. There's a lot of shapes and textures available. And again, a lot of colors. This one, I think, is Shenandoah. I think ornamental grasses are not appreciated enough in landscape design. They're beautiful in the fall. You get those beautiful color changes, and they're also really valuable to wildlife. The grasses themselves are shelter, but they're also a food source. A lot of our native bird species love the seeds, especially on those panicums. These are great at controlling erosion. They're phenomenal for soaking up water. These are great in rain gardens. These are great nesting material for birds as well. And again, I just think they're not appreciated enough, and you can get all different sizes and forms of these guys. But again, they're also just indestructible as well. Some more ornamental grasses to include andropogons. These tend to be more upright, but again, beautiful fall color. Let them stand throughout the winter, and you're going to get that visual structure. And again, they're habitat for our wildlife too, and they're providing seeds and nesting material. For shorter grasses, more bunch type grasses, little blue stems are great. And again, both of these have so many cultivars on the market now. You can get golden ones, you can get, again, the reds, but like you see here with the little blue stem, there's some that are more gray, there's some that are more of a dusty blue. There's so many different visual interests to fit your garden design. Purple loosestrife. This is a really, really big problem a little further north. People love it because it's, again, indestructible. It grows fast, and it's got those beautiful purple flower spikes. I've started seeing this pop up along reservoirs. I will go fishing, and I saw this the other night in Suffolk. Thankfully, I had the pruners on me, and I cut off all the flowers I could reach. Each flower can produce millions and millions of seed. So this spreads prolifically. It outcrowds all the other native plants that should be there. It actually will grow so dense that wildlife can't move through it sometimes. So it's a really noxious plant. But if you didn't know those things, it's obviously very beautiful. Can't argue that. But if you like that purple and vertical interest, I would redirect you to one of my favorite perennials, Liatris. So Liatris spicata is a shorter variety that's pictured here. And then there's Liatris pycnostachya, which is a little taller. It can be 3 to 5 feet. They have that beautiful vertical flower structure. In my experience, they're indestructible as well. I've grown them in 6 inches of clay in downtown Norfolk. I've seen them pop up in my frog bog through 2 inches of standing water. I love these plants. In my experience, they tolerate pollution really well. They have a long bloom period. Pollinators go nuts for them. And then once these plants are done blooming, let the seed heads dry, and these are like a magnet for goldfinches. They also work really well as cut flowers too. Obedient plant, this one is for more wet settings, but again, same great vertical interest that you see with that loosestrife. If you like a plant that spreads, like if you're looking for a budget-friendly option, and you like that vivid color, I would suggest bee balms or monardas. You can get different heights, different colors. They are magnets for not only butterflies, but hummingbirds, and you can make tea. They smell really good. But again, they spread quickly, so you can divide them and move them around. Onto shrubs, we have heavenly bamboo. Nandina is really popular in a lot of the older homes, in a lot of retail kind of business. I can't think of like the parking lot situations. Sorry. It is really tough. It's got great fall color, and it's got these berries folks find interesting. Unfortunately, research shows that these berries are incredibly toxic to some of our bird species. So I know not everyone can rip something out as they learn it's bad. You have to have a replacement plan in place. But if you have this in your yard and you're not able to take it out, we ask that you please cut the berries off or cut the flowers off before they form berries, just so the birds aren't eating them. So, but people like it because it's durable and it's got fruit and red color. Our native blueberries do not get enough love. All of our blueberries, for the most part, they're native. They have specialist bee relationships. They have beautiful, beautiful fall color. They actually tolerate more shade than people realize when you're not growing like the blueberries to like get the large fruits like you see in grocery stores. They're normally like a marginal shrub, and they have beautiful flowers in early spring, obviously covered in berries, so you get a lot of bird activity. But again, I really think the value is in their fall color when it comes to using this in the landscape. Another great one for a foundation shrub that's tough, doesn't need maintenance, dwarfiopon hollies, Ilex vomitoria. These are really great replacements for boxwoods as well. Please, if you're using this in this setting, get a dwarf Yopon holly. They naturally are tall, scraggly trees. Thankfully, most often, if you see a Yopon holly for sale, it is going to be a dwarf variety. You can hedge these like a boxwood. If you like formal shapes, you can prune these any time of year. They will flower and produce berries as well for birds, which boxwoods don't. And you can get them with different colors, like a little darker purple and things like that. Also, you can make tea out of them. If people like a little more of the loose structure and the flowers they see on Nandina, as well as fall color, coastal Leucothoe is a really popular one with the gardeners here, but I don't think a lot of folks elsewhere know about it. So this is a really great alternative as well. It's just going to be a little shorter in my experience than a Nandina. Japanese barberry. Japanese barberry is thorny. It is tick central. These plants grow very dense, and so they have a really high relative humidity, and those thorns inhibit larger predators and mammals from getting to the base of the plant. So we see small rodent populations concentrate, and we also see ticks concentrate in barberries. And because of that humidity, the ticks have a longer activity period. I think it's like 17 hours a day to like 23. It's crazy. So if you overlaid a map of like where you see tick populations increasing in Lyme disease, it also kind of correlates with invasive barberry populations. So barberry is a nightmare of mine. I saw it in a lot of the forested systems when I was out in Virginia Tech. But it is really commonly, at least in my experience, seen in like parking lots, places where it's really high reflective heat. You just need something that won't quit. And again, people like the color. I would redirect you guys to Sweet Spire or Itea virginica. It's not going to have that color year round, but it's beautiful fall color. And it gets these really cool flowers in the summer. It can grow in really wet areas. It can grow in dry areas, but it's going to have a ton of really beneficial pollinator activity as well. Burning bush, this is another one people like for the color, and it's just tough as nails. Again, another one of those what I call parking lot plants, where it's just put it in bed with terrible soil and high heat, full sun. I like to introduce folks to fragrant sumac. It's a little lower, but it's got vivid color, and I really like that plant, so I'd love to see it more commonly in the landscape. Autumn olive, this is a larger shrub. This is salt tolerant, evergreen, and it's got berries on it. You can eat the berries if you like, but the birds do. And unfortunately, when the birds ingest this, it irritates their digestive tract. They're not evolved to tolerate this plant here, and they regurgitate it, and that leads to the overall decline in health of the birds that eat this plant. So it's not great for the bird populations, but again, people like it because it's evergreen, salt tolerant, and fruits. Wax myrtles don't get enough love, in my opinion, either. You can get tree-shaped wax myrtles. You can get dwarf wax myrtles. You can prune wax myrtles into like formal hedges. I love them. They're evergreen. They're salt tolerant. They do great with high wind. They're covered in those waxy berries and they're fragrant. So this is another one that's loved by birds, and it is good for them. They are adapted to eat these berries. Privet. This is another the ligustrums. We see some Elaeagnus. Privet is another just horrible invasive in our area. It's all along the marginal systems. Privet, salt tolerant in some areas. It is just evergreen and indestructible. Unfortunately, birds have trouble with these berries too. But people like it because it can form a dense privacy hedge. It grows fast. And again, the berry set is of interest for folks. So with that in mind, I like black haw viburnums. They're not going to be evergreen, but they do have similar interesting berries. The plus side is you do get beautiful fall color and you get some really nice flower sprays. So if you're looking for a kind of fast growing privacy with a little bit of berry interest, I would suggest a viburnum. Butterfly bush. This is on the early detection. I kind of just put this in the presentation to stir the pot in conversation with folks, but obviously people love it because they think it attracts butterflies, and it does. But I've even seen researchers compare this to like like if you're trying to provide sugar for something, like if you wanted to feed your kids or your grandkids, you could give them a bowl of Skittles and that'll get sugar, or you can give them a bowl of fruit and that also provides sugar. That's kind of like the butterfly bush. For our wildlife, it's like giving them the Skittles versus giving them the nutritional sugars that they would need from our native plant material. So it's a beautiful bush. It's had a beautiful marketing campaign, but it's something to keep an eye on. But people love the pollinator activity and they love the flower shape. So steeple bush, it's not as large as the butterfly bush, but if you really like the flower shape, this is a great alternative. I know I'm coming up on 7 here. I'm talking real quick. I have a few more shrubs, and then I was going to talk on a couple trees. The linden viburnum, people like the berries on this one, so I steer them towards winterberry. This is a beautiful native shrub. It is a holly that drops its leaves and then it fruits in the winter. You just need to have a male and female species. The female is the one that produces berries. You could put a male plant anywhere in the backyard, in the back of the flower bed. That's fine. You just have to have the males somewhere in the vicinity so the females can get pollinated and produce berries. But the birds absolutely love these. The white mulberry, we talked about the history with this in the silk moths, and it's a vector for disease. People like the berries on it. The good news is we have a native one, and we should plant the native one out more often because a lot of them have died off. Princess tree, this is obviously a beautiful striking tree. It's got tropical large foliage. People love the flowers on it. It grows quick. I like to redirect folks to catalpas. We have northern catalpas and southern catalpas, but they have large leaves, which also give that tropical aesthetic. And they have really large flowers as well, which kind of lends to the tropical vibe. And they're large white trumpet-shaped flowers with purple specks on them. I think they're absolutely stunning. And it's a relatively quick growing tree too. Tree of Heaven, this is a huge issue up north. But folks originally liked the visual interest, the texture of the plant, the speed that the plant grows. Now, I mean, I have never even seen it for sale. It's just something that folks have a lot of, they might not realize. It's a highly invasive tree. But if it is something folks are like, oh, but I love I love like the leaves on it. I love the flowers. Yellowwood is a really cool alternative. This is a great smaller tree. This is a good one. You can plant this tree somewhat near your home and you don't have to worry about large tree that might fall over in a storm. It's not going to interfere with power lines. It's got beautiful flower panicles and also really stunning fall color too. Bradford pear, literally anything else. I can't stand these trees. When I used to work for a mow and blow landscape company, the only thing we said this tree was good for was job security because their branches are always snapping off, they're always dying. These trees are a nightmare. They're originally introduced as a sterile tree that did not last long. They smell pretty bad, but for folks that don't know all the backstory, this tree is covered in white flowers in spring. It looks really beautiful. And it's a smaller tree. So again, it's not necessarily ones that we have to worry about getting really large, interfering with structures or power lines. And so for that, I do have an actual alternative, service berries. Service berries are one of my favorite small trees. Um, Beautiful white flowers. They don't smell bad like the Bradford does. And they actually produce really good fruit. If the birds don't pick it clean, I highly recommend you try some of these berries. They make great pie and jellies. And you can also get this tree as a shrub form. You can get it as a multi-stemmed trunk. You can get it as a singular trunk pictured here. But again, beautiful, beautiful spring flowers. So I think absolutely stunning alternative to a Bradford pear. With that, I'm going to, let's see. Yeah, the spring plant sale, obviously that one's passed. I'm going to stop sharing my screen and read through some of the chat stuff. I know that I talked really quickly. I had so much I wanted to share with you guys in that it's one of my favorite presentations. Let's see. Okay, stop sharing. But there's a lot of ground to cover. I'm going to put my email and the email for the Ask a Plant question in the chat, where if you have specific questions, please use that. It's free. I know I put a shout out for folks if you have issues with things like English ivy in your yard or the yellow flag iris. I didn't have time tonight, but I do have some maintenance strategies I've tried and worked through, and I can help you guys and offer suggestions for your property because I know those can be nightmarish to try and think about removing. But yeah, there's a lot covered. I know there's a lot of slides that I went through, but I hope some things stuck with you guys. And let's see. I'm gonna open the chat.
Alex, I put the link to the invasive plant list.
Yeah, perfect.
So that's in there. And then Mark's question about a different kind of invasive issue with the natural world, and that's noise. I know that's a passion for him. And any programs that happen at the garden about that?
I would love that. I would say we would be very interested in programs. Consider we're right next to the airport. I cannot tell you how many times I've been on a beautiful walk and talk, and then all of a sudden jet noise happens taken off. Or downtown Norfolk, there's so much noise pollution in that sense, but we haven't had anything on that. We just had a presentation last week on light pollution. So that is something that we're talking about, the dark sky initiatives, but unfortunately nothing about noise yet. So if you have resources you would like to share, I would absolutely be interested in checking that out. But unfortunately, I can't help with that specific one. I did have a shameless plug for, actually, no pun intended, for you all here. If you're in my area, I have a plug sale, landscape plugs, and I do this every year, and it benefits specifically the education and community programs at the garden. This is a fall plant sale, and it is all native perennials. They are themed garden kits that I put together. They are plants that grow well together. And the themes I have, there's like Hummingbird Haven or Pollinator Powerhouse, Sun Loving Kits, Bird Banquet, Coastal Virginia. They're all pre-designed, and they come with the informational brochures that tell you about every plant in there. But it's 15 plants per kit. So if anybody's in my area and they're like, I liked the idea of introducing natives to my garden, I tried to make it as easy as possible for folks. So that fall plug sale is online the weekend of September 11th. If anybody is interested, that's my shameless plug for the education department. But a lot of the plants I talked about today in the perennial section will actually be in that plug sale. So encourage you guys to check that out. But other than that, unless there's any more questions, I really appreciate you guys having me out. This is one of my favorite classes to do.
We appreciate having you.
Thanks,
it's been a really good summer with the presentations that you've done for us. And we've had several people say, what's next, right? So we'll have to reach out and see what programs we can do in the coming fall. Because we sure do appreciate partnering with the gardens. Y'all, any questions for Alex before we let her go enjoy her night and let her cat get some attention? Her poor cat. Let's
Did you
start.
guys hear that during the
Sounds like my cat.
kept trying to push her off the table? Well, thank you guys for having me. I just put it in the chat, but the plug sale information will be added to our website next week, but it's online September 11th until Sunday it sells out. So thank you guys. Please come visit the garden. It was fantastic talking to you all.
Yeah, I have a question real fast. I can't find the link that goes to what DCR that with all those PDFs you could get, I guess, with the invasive and whatever plants, all that, we couldn't read them because there's so much. And there was a link that Lynn, did you?
Yeah, that's in the chat. Honestly, I just went to
there it is.
CCDR invasive plants, and it came up. There was a spreadsheet of it or a printable list. So that's what that second link is. If you copy that, you should be able to access it.
Okay, thank you.
Sure.
And sorry, not to drag it out a little further, but I'm going to post a link to DCR's page. They actually have native plant brochures for all the regions of Virginia. So coastal plain, Piedmont, grasslands, mountain riparian. They have all the invasive information, but they also have it broken down by plants that are native. Now, these are going to be the species that you would naturally find, not like the garden cultivars, but it's still great information. So I just put that link in the chat and you can scroll down that page a bit and you'll find the brochures for your region.
Thanks, Alex.
Absolutely. Thank you guys so much.
Thank you.
Appreciate you. Thanks so much. Good night,
Absolutely.
everybody.
Good night, everyone.